research. He is a curator of diffusion architecture page, and it's my go-to source for finding what's the latest in creative AI, what are the amazing artists in the community. So he's done an incredible job. So if you haven't followed, definitely check that page out. So hi Daniel, what are you up to? How are you doing?
Hey, Mayor. Thank you for having me. Everything's going all right, man. Just been working and trying to do things in creative AI. But yeah, thank you for having me. This is gonna be awesome. And like you're obviously doing also pretty cool things as well in this space. So I'm happy to have this conversation.
Nice. So you observe a lot of artist work, live in day out with creative AI, but also experiment and build your own. So in the past last 6 months, what are the things you're quite excited about in the creative AI research space?
Yeah, so one of the things, or at least that I've been tracking over the last 2 years from like having like the diffusion architecture platform and seeing how people have been using the text to image models to some extent or exploring them. I think that the whole idea of a person being able to generate something by just text and exploring ideas that um, how do I say it? Like seem maybe not useful, but I don't want to say not useful, but maybe ideas that you have in your mind, you're like, oh, I wonder what that could look like. And now you have that possibility of visualizing it. I think that opens up a lot of interesting creative potential. So I think from that perspective, I think it's really cool to see, for example, like one of the examples that I always like to give is that people are doing these kind of like rock houses, and they seem to attract a lot the curiosity of like the audience and observers because it's something that like who's gonna render a rock house before, right? Like with previous tools, like if you're just gonna model rock house in Rhino or whatever, and then like render it, like it wasn't like unless you're doing artistic wise, like nobody's gonna do it. But now you have the possibility to do that pretty quick and like test out a whole bunch of iterations. So um that process or like of being able to test those ideas, I think that's what's been really impactful and I find really exciting. And I think with the availability of these like kind of like foundational models that are getting better and better, and then being able to incorporate it into like other modalities like 3D generation, and then like 3D generation is like can really good, right? And fast too. So people are going to be able to explore a lot with those ideas. And then, well, video, right? In video, like we're kind of like at this moment where we've been held up with like the Sora release, right? Like everybody's like waiting for that to happen. Um, but I seen like some artists like Paul Trillo who's using Sora right now, and he's developing like some incredible like videos that makes you wonder like what's gonna happen when it gets released to the public and kind of has this like mid journey moment where everybody's like testing it out, right? So I'm really excited for that. I think the what most excites me is the creativity and the ability of people to try these things and how they come up with like cool ideas that probably weren't imagined before.
Mm. So, like what Sora made me think. So there are two train of thoughts currently with the AI to design workflow. One could use like text to image, 2D representation, then somehow with depth map and other workflows get 3D point cloud data or mesh data, get into their own software like Rhino, Revit, or whatever, Blender, whatever they're using, tweak it and make it feasible for, let's say, architecture or interior design project. And there's another train of thought where just make text to video directly and have like spatial depth data about moving into rooms and stuff. And if that communicates, like, can we bypass, like, to a point where sometimes we do the 3D modeling for better spatial understanding and cognition, how things are related and stuff. So what are your thoughts like? with this approaches.
You mean like how we would generate like 3D space with like these types of models, or
Ye-
like how to understand space?
Yeah, like if Sora like model which creates, let's say, better uh what do you say, like spatial consistency. Like right now
Yeah.
we don't have spatial consistency with this, and if that problem is solved, uh do we
Hmm.
need to 3D model to communicate spatial idea?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I haven't used Sora myself, so I'm kind of just speculating on what I'm seeing. But I do see that it does have like really interesting spatial consistency, and it's kind of so like the current approaches to like do 3D generation rely right now kind of like on just imagery and like cameras, or being able to place cameras so you can get like what you're talking about, like the depth projection or some sort of relationship between like a camera, 3D space location, and then how do you rebuild or reconstruct using uh, that. So it relies a lot on the camera and the image depth generation. With Sora, if you're able to get a 3D consistent video, I think what would make it really useful in some sense is that if you're able to control it with a camera, right? Or if it's like conditioned with a camera. I don't know if they worked that out yet. It seems like right now you probably could prompt uh how the camera might move, right? Like if you're generating a video, you might be able to say like, do a pan or do like an orbit around an object. So I wonder if they have that condition via text. Um, but it's kind of curious to see how consistent it's able to generate 3D scenes. And one of the videos that I saw recently from like one of the create like one, I guess it's one of the people leading the Sora team in OpenAI, is that not only do you get this kind of scene consistency, but you also get like the emergent capabilities of like lane space interpolation, where you can go from like one scene to another scene, and in video, it'll slowly blends it in so it makes sense. And I thought that was amazing. Like that's pretty cool. Like we seen, for example, like Rafik Anadol use like lane space interpolation between images, right? But it's still 2D. But now what
Mm.
happens when you do it in like a video in 3D space? Like that's fascinating, right? That's a possibility that we haven't explored before. Um, so yeah, I'm curious to see how that goes. In For example, I do think that at least at this point, in like one of the previous projects that I worked on with George and Carlos, where we were exploring how to do um, essentially like take like a 3D model from like a city and then see if we can reimagine it using
Mm.
text. And we tried like a whole bunch of approaches, like using like regular stable diffusion, like image to image, or things like that to figure out some consistency, some control land. But the approach that worked the best was like a video to video, because
Ah.
it keeps that consistency. And it was able to take like a system 3D model and then completely redo it, and we would be able to reconstruct it using like a Gaussian splat, like with the new 3D text of 3D or whatever. So that was really cool. So I do think from that perspective that I think video would definitely play a key role in being able to do 3D generation. I think that's probably where the whole field might end up going.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like uh what I was thinking is like sometimes there are some requirements where the end output is the project walkthrough video. So when you
Hmm.
do like 3D modeling the way and then do the pan, and what you mentioned about like conditioning or controls over camera movement, like height, width, or like panning or going rotation and width, that would be super useful. And that's also, I think, control net allowed that like initial text to image or image to image. It's good for like starting seed creative workflow, but like real world projects have constraint. Okay, I want to modify some aspect of this room, maintain the geometry and that control net level uh grounding So before that, it made me like I mentioned about two workflows, but there's also another line where you don't need 3D geometry representation as meshes or point cloud. We have this NeRF and Gaussian splitting uh, wave of thought. So what has been your uh, experiments in that space? And right now, do you think we could designers could integrate that in the current workflow, or what are some bottlenecks?
Yeah, sure. So, um, that's a good point because it's kind of like the 3D representation, at least in machine learning, right? It's like you have all these types of 3D representations. You can go point clouds, meshes, voxels, like sign distance fields, right? And then you get to like the ones that are popping out now, which they're kind of like implicit representations. So you don't have the geometry. You just have kind of like this way to how do you say, like input like camera coordinates,
Mm,
and then the network would figure out what should be visible from those camera coordinates, right? So there's no 3D geometry, but you can take that and then translate into 3D geometry. Um, and I think that one, from that perspective, it's really useful to be able to get like reconstruction like really fast without the limits of geometry. Um, because if you tie it to like a mesh, like you could use a mesh, but usually the way that it would start is like you would have like if you want to reconstruct or generate a geometry with like a mesh type of approach, is you kind of have to build like a sphere, and then essentially that sphere would essentially morph or wrap into whatever shape is being reconstructed, which it would give you like a possibility of having like a watertight mesh, but then it's only focused on object centric things, so you don't get like a whole scene reconstruction. And what NeRF and Gaussian splat allowed is that it gives you like scene reconstruction essentially. Like it could be almost boundless, right? Like which is kind of interesting. And from that perspective, I seen progress where they're now getting like Gaussian splat and nerves to like work in real time, and there's being like apps built on top of that, like for real estate or things of that nature, that let you just dive into the scene, and it kind of looks like a render video, but it's not. It's like a Gaussian splat or a nerve. Um, so how can that be useful in like architecture or design? I think it might not be as useful yet because there's not much control in it yet, or like they're
mm,
still kind of like tweaking the way that you can control it. Um, what's interesting about if you're going to use it for like 3D generation is that you're still using um these foundational like image or text to image models. So you're
mm,
kind of relying on that backbone to generate like the scene, right? So it almost kind of like that's the style that you're gonna get from that model. So it depends a lot on that. Um, but the implications of being able to generate boundless scenes, and then if you're able to visualize them real time, I think Meta is like developing something in their reality labs like space where like they're actually trying to take this into VR, like using like Gaussian splats and NeRF. So that's going to be interesting. Like if you can take architectural geometry, I think eventually we probably get there, and you're probably going to have like these real time visualizations that are going to look super crisp that can run in VR. So I think from that perspective, that's going to be really cool. And then when you find a way to have more control where you can like edit things within those scenes, you're probably going to be able to use text to edit and things like that. So that's going to be really cool. I think from that perspective, we might still be a little bit away, but it's definitely on the pipeline scenes.
okay. I think I lost my connection for a sec, but I got the oral answer. So I think to build on that point, if I'm not wrong, this nerf or Gaussian split doesn't have like a scale or in it. Like it's unitized. What I mean, like when you do say iPhone lidar and RGBD, you can have a real world scale of various objects 3D reconstructed. Here with this models, you have to then rescale if you are matching to the real world dimension because it's in a different dimension space. Like, is that so? You had to rescale, or it
Oh, like scale. Like you could tweak the you could have like a scale, or like you could input a way to multiply like that 3D space, because essentially how these models work is like they'll create kind of like some bounding box, right? And it's
mm,
usually centered between -1 and 1
correct?
on 3D space, just for deep learning, gradient descent stuff, right? Um, but you could have like some sort of scaler where you input like a real world scene and then like train it at that lower scale, or like that normalized scale, and then once it's done then you can just rescale it back. There was like a project that was really interesting. I remember it came out a bit ago, which they were trying to like nerf like the whole city of San Francisco, but they couldn't do it in one nerf, so they had to like kind of like stitch together a whole
Mm,
bunch of nerves, right? And you would be able to interpolate through all that, which was kind of fascinating because that was like a real scale model, but there was no 3D geometry. It was just like camera positions that you're gonna interpolate along, and then you can go up, move through the street, and things like that. Um, so I think from that perspective, yes, it's definitely gonna work. The other thing that is interesting about not having scale, and like one of the most other like interesting cases that I've seen, is that they've used it in visualizing 3D organs and things like that, or
mm,
things related to like medicine, body scans, or there was like someone that I think somebody did like something related to like the heart or something like that. It was like a biomedicine type of thing, but they use a nerve to be able to visualize it instead of using like the traditional like what is it called, like those 3D MRI scans or whatever. And they were able to kind of get the object in 3D from that. So I thought that was really interesting because that's I guess that's the benefit of not having a scale, but the benefit of having kind of like this uh implicit representation that doesn't rely on geometry. So I think, yeah, from that perspective, it's really cool.
got it. And you did a workshop recently with Design Morphin, which when I saw the workshop video, I was like, this is quite interesting workflow you're teaching. So can you share like what were the main things you taught in the class?
Yeah, sure. So so currently there's been I think thanks to the development of like nerve type models, or the kind of like stable diffusion text to image generators, and then there's also like the monocular depth estimation open source models, that you have the combination of these three I guess like tools now, because you can call them tools, but uh, you can use them to essentially generate like a 3D scene. And all they rely on, which is fascinating, it's kind of like the main operator is like a camera, right? So it's also how do you create trajectories for the camera that would generate this 3D scene that then would fuse the image generator and the depth map projector with that camera, and then slowly move the camera in 3D
Mm,
space to be able to start mapping out a scene. And this kind of like line of work, I find it really interesting because up to this point, it seems like that would be one of the ways that you can get scene generation without having to like train like a model from scratch, or like train like a 3D model from scratch, right? Like a 3D GANs. Like we don't need that anymore essentially for that. Um, and as these models get better and better, like scene is probably going to get even better and better to generate. So what I was teaching in that workshop was pretty much that. Like, how can we use a model called Text to Room, or like this project that was created, Text to Room? I think they came out of Michigan University. Um, how do we use that to just kind of like mess around with it and test how it actually works, and like what are like the base components, and then like to show the people that participated like you have these base components, but they are not there yet, or like there's still kind of errors or mismatches that occur in this type of approach, and it or in that line of research. So how do you show that to people so they can try it out, test it out, and then have them generate the space? Like they can start from like an image, edit the prompt, and generate a space from that, or they can just generate a space from like a prompt itself. So that was kind of what I was showing in that workshop. And then how do you take that, get the mesh out, take it into Unreal Engine, which is like a great tool for visualization. And I think like the kind of workflow for that is to get them to experience it now from like if you were actually in it. And on Unreal Engine, you can send it to like VR or AR. So that was kind of like the idea to build this workflow where you can generate a space in 3D using text and then take it into like an immersive environment that you can experience. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. So my idea was to showcase that and see how this kind of research is evolving.
Got it. And what's the output format for texture room?
You get an output mesh, so it would be like a fully uh, smooth mesh in some ways, right?
So it's when you upload, let's say, a starting point as image, it's generating multi-view images with camera, and then within texture room, it's doing like stitching or slam-based
Yeah.
technique for 3D reconstruction based on those in gen- generated.
Yeah, so the way that they call it in the paper, like progressive updating, progressively updating, or something like that,
Hmm.
where you start from like one image, let's say, and then that image is connected to like a camera, and then you project that image using like a depth map, right? So it like pops out the image, and then what you're gonna do is like once you have that 3D representation of the image, you're just gonna slightly rotate the camera, right? And then place other cameras in other locations like that, and then take that 3D projection and reproject it back into like an image plane. And when you reproject it back, the gaps that are created from the depth map, those gaps become kind of like the mask, essentially.
Um,
And you use that mask to then take like an imprinting model and fill in those gaps, right? And then once you have that, then you can reproject it back again from like another camera, because you are now living in 3D world space. So wherever you place cameras, you're going to be able to see the 3D representation. So now you're just kind of like in painting in 3D essentially.
mm,
And then from there, you slowly start to build like a trajectory of cameras that they slowly start progressively iterating over this space and slowly building up the mesh to be able to form into a space. The limitation with that is that you have to figure out a way um, to set the cameras, or how do you position the cameras in space so it captures uh, those empty spaces to be invented.
got it. And does it output a stitched mesh? And like if there are, let's say, windows and furniture, are those segmented meshes?
Um, well, this model was really rudimentary in that respect, that it would just become like a whole mesh. Like
Correct.
it doesn't have any semantic information where like you have like separate objects. It was just like one whole mesh that gets projected. Um, I have seen that in robotics, they are using similar approaches where like they can now combine semantic information, either like using kind of like projecting like clip onto
Mm-hmm.
like the 3D scene. There was like a paper called LERP, I think it was, where like you can now take like this kind of implicit representation, so like a nerve model, whatever, um, project clip onto it. So now you have segmentic kind of like querying of objects in space. So if you were looking for like a desk, or like whatever this is. You can kind of query it, and like you will be able to get that 3D location of that. So I think, yeah, we didn't do that. That was a little bit more advanced. Maybe for the next one. But it's really cool that they're actually using this in robotics. And what I found fascinating about all these approaches now with like kind of like these foundation language models, foundation vision models, is that when you combine them now, you can actually take them to robotics, right? And then you get in robotics like the fuse of all these things. But now you have to think about like 3D space, and like these models are a way, or like NeRF and Gaussian splat or whatever, are a way to get the 3D space scene, and then you can plug in the other models to be able to navigate or extract features from the 3D scene in a 2D way. Um, so I think that's kind of where, at least for me, that seems like the most exciting. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, maybe.
I, I can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, you're back.
Yeah. I draw a lot of inspiration from space as well, like beyond how the spatial needs. They, are you following? Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I
I was
hear
just
you.
sharing. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so much similarity from AI robotics research, which we could translate in like architecture and interior design related worlds, like how robots perceive the world, semantically make decisions, and those are so much useful in our workflows as well. So yeah, that's the thing with RGBD related 3D reconstruction. Sometimes they have like a texture which is like fully stitched, and then that applies on the stitched mesh. So you get the thing, but like for that limits the editability aspect, where if you just want to increase the window size, since you don't have that semantic separation of mesh, you lose that kind of tweaking control. But that's quite interesting. And uh, you already mentioned that this what would be a next workshop would like to
Oh, wait, can you say that again? I could have.
teach? Another workshop you teach?
Um, so it would be something along those lines where like now you can get semantic information, or like a little bit more control of how you place things, right? Um, what where like you have, so like one of the things that, for example, these models do lack, um, that would be, I guess, a little bit more relatable to architecture or interior design, is like the condition of layouts, right? So how do you get that how you call it, architecture intelligence, right, into like 3D, or how do you inject that into a model? There's been some proposals or approaches that have tried to do that, like condition, you can condition a 3D generation with like a floor plan or something like that. Um, but then you, like, it's gonna be generated into floor plan. Like that's kind of like the other thing. So like if you want to have like a fully automated workflow, like you have to find a way to generate a floor plan and then take that into 3D. But I think the idea of being able to have that condition, I think that's what makes it a little bit more realistic. And then it would make it more interesting to try. So I would say like something along those lines where I can do uh, is something that's more architectural intelligence in that sense, and but still have the inputs of the advantage of these models like natural language, image generation, and even the ability to like do kind of what I was mentioning before, like semantic segmentation in 3D. I don't know. To me, it's like almost like what they're doing in robotics could probably be brought over in some way. So I'm thinking like, how do you kind of bring some of that
Function.
knowledge into architecture, or like how do you combine the two. Because I think what's being done in robotics is really interesting, but I don't know how it would be helpful in like architectural design in that sense. But from the perspective of being able to manipulate 3D space or perceive 3D space in a way that is intelligent or like as close to humans, right? With like semantic maps and things like that in 3D, I think could be really useful. So something along those lines I would do.
Yeah, like spatial revisions, I think we could benefit a lot because like robots want to move an object and they have their own functions which the robot can okay lift up and stuff. We need, let's say, for generating more designs or editor design, we need that same workflow. Okay, move the furniture from this to this, check out this new layout generated by this iteration. So those methods of modifying geometry like could be useful the way they are doing it in that field for sure.
Yeah. And another thing like that I always kind of think about, and I think this is um what's this guy's Kenneth Stanley. I don't know. Are you familiar with Kenneth Stanley? Ken Stanley. He was at OpenAI. He developed. He was part of the algorithm called Poet, which was kind of like essentially what they're trying to do is like to create an open-ended learning agent, right? That can generate its own environment while it learns from that environment or while it applies actions in that environment. So they call it like auto curriculum. And the way that that works is like the agent would go into an environment. It starts off simple, but then the environment progressively gets harder, and like it gives the agent harder tasks to do. And then the agent will learn and evolve based on those harder tasks, but the environment would also get harder. Um, and I think that's kind of an interesting approach to think about it, to train maybe like a smart AI robotic or like architectural intelligence. Like, how do you build something like that that lets you find what is interesting? And the concept of interestingness, um, it's something that I don't know how to define, but there's been kind of like talks about like how do you define interesting, where you have these agents that are generating things. How do they automatically pick what's interesting in the
Mm.
environment? And because I think what architects or designers sometimes are after is the concept of novelty. So like, how do you design like a space that's novel, that's like new and things like that? Um, so how can we actually translate that into architecture? Like that's a question that I have sometimes.
Yeah, I see. You know what's interesting? Like I read that paper of iDesigner. Now GPT vision models. Did I lose you? Or did you follow along? Uh,
Yeah, yeah, I hear you.
okay. So what I was about to say is like things become interesting. Like okay, step one, okay, creation of space. Step two is revision and design. And step three is evaluation also. Like with AI agents who has the method to create geometry, then modify geometry, and plugging into like GPT vision pipeline, which can evaluate and compare space. Okay, is this a better design or that? That makes like the generative design like in a different way where okay, uh, previously we were doing optimization methods for moving like for I think like building performance would be a good example. We try out different sizing optimization algorithm which evaluates it. There wasn't previous
Mhm.
algorithm which could subjectively evaluate a space whether this is good or bad, and now it's possible, and that changes the way generative design plus evaluation works now. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting. The idea of having like this is what I'm saying. Like, this is kind of like really connected to like robotics, I think, to some extent, because that's kind of what a robot has to. If you want a robot in like a real space, the robot has to be able to like know like where it can move or how to distinguish perceived 3D space in a way that it doesn't damage it, or that it can actually have a path to it, like a path prediction. But then the idea of having like a visual perception module where you can say, okay, like, is this okay? Is this right? Like, or like that could probably be applied to architecture. And that was like kind of an initial idea of what I was doing with like the Unreal Engine to be able to have it like the 3D what is it called, 3D generation, and like bring it into Unreal Engine, because you can place like an agent there in a real type of environment, and essentially you can equip that agent with like a vision perception, like you're saying, and have it kind of like, you can give it a task, be like, okay, like go find like geometry that maybe doesn't make sense or something like that. And maybe it can go along and then go do that and figure it out and bring you back like that, right? So it's like a task that is kind of like robotic oriented, but instead of like saying go bring me like this object, like go find geometry that is bad, right? Or go find like a point of
Mm.
view of this model that is like really interesting. um and and that, I would say it could be translated. I don't know if anybody has done it yet. I haven't like seen anything like it, but I think it's a really interesting way to go about it. The only thing that I've seen that has this line of thought is, for example, there was a paper that came out. It was like 3D or GPT 3D or something like that, where they were using like Blender to generate like a 3D scene. So the way that they did it is like they split it into two parts where they have a generator agent and then they have kind of like a critic agent. Um, so the agent is generating the scene. He's doing one task, which is just to generate the scene, create the code to generate the scene. And then there's like a separate agent that's going to be able to look at that scene and tell you whether the scene matches like the original prompt. Um, and it would be able to view it from like different angles, and then based on that, I guess it will tell you like, okay, tweak this, tweak that, or change like how it measures like the scene, right? Give you like some sort of metric that it can change, so the other agent can go back and iterate. Um so I think that's interesting. I don't know if it would be applicable to architecture. I'm curious to see if that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like when you were talking, it made me think, what if, like, if we have the camera control parameters, it can take various perspective of a room scene, take those rendered images, and ask like this model evaluate a shot of which is the most Instagrammable photo of this project, and then get it
Yeah.
out. So we have now more automated pipeline of taking that perspective render and also out of multiple perspective, which is the best one for the project marketing or something.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it that far, but that makes a lot of sense. And it's a it's an interesting idea, in the sense that if we were willing to do that, we'll be offloading like some sort of design curation to like these models, right? Um, if we let a model do that, which is kind of interesting, because like then at that point it's like, okay, is the model the creative one that's trying to find these views, and then we just kind of look at it and we say, okay, this one makes sense. Uh, and And I think like from that perspective, it could be really interesting how that relationship between, if this is like something that could be done, how that relationship between like a designer and AI would also change once again, because now the agent could be more active in that respect, and it'll be a
Mm.
lot more smarter than just generating like images, right? It'll have some agency or some task that it has to try to solve, and that task is highly subjective based on the human's response to whatever it picks out. Um, I don't know. That's an interesting thought, man. I haven't thought about that before.
That's one of the things I love talking about you is like during the discussion it sparks new ideas for sure. So uh,
Yeah, because it is interesting to like be able to. Oops, I didn't hear you. Say it again.
No, I was just saying like it during our discussion, the way you like think about the subject, I resonate with those thoughts and it sparks new ideas for sure. So that's why I love brainstorming ideas with you.
Yeah. And it's kind of wild that we're talking about this now with like, do you remember like we had done a workshop for digital futures like in 2021, I think it was. Um, and this was like text to image models, but like at that point, it was like crap. Like compared to what it is now, that was like the early stage.
Weak
Um,
again.
and then yeah, and then like 2 or 3 years later, we have like incredible models plus like LLMs that are like amazing, right? Trained on like I don't even know what 10 trillion tokens of the whole internet. Um,
Hmm.
and you're just like, wow, like what could be in like 5 years? Like how can this space evolve in 5 years? And I think like the agent route or being able to compress like all these types of knowledge sources into like these models, and then now you're kind of just like manipulating them in like task based agents. uh that could be really interesting. I don't know where that's going, but it's definitely like something that is really interesting at the moment.
God. And before I forget, I also want to cover the 3D clustering project you were
Yeah, yeah.
mentioning, and also you had this idea of like the content over diffusion architecture, which has like some amazing artists, and like how do we navigate that space in a spatial web? So
Sure, I can go over that a little bit. The so I've been doing this page since like August of 2022 now. And this was kind of like at the early stages of like Mid Journey. So when like Mid Journey started popping out into the scene, and then at that point in time, like the image quality obviously was very rough. It was like early stage, but now it's like evolved to like a certain point where like you're like, wow, like these images are incredible. And then throughout time, you can see like the artists or designers that have been using this technology to like experiment or try out concepts and ideas. They have generated like some pretty interesting imagery, right? Um, and my idea behind the page was to be able to kind of build like some sort of record of like all this progressive kind of like evolution of the space, to see how people are thinking or how they're coming up with ideas and actually putting them in images. So how to record that, and then from that, okay, if you have that, then you can probably run some ML like techniques on top of it, like clustering or like feature extraction, and then try to understand if there's like trends or things like that with those images, where it could be like things like materiality, how much water there is in the image, how much sky there is in the image, greenery. Is it like interior spaces or like exterior spaces, locations? And you can use kind of like the visual language the visual large language models to gather some information without a human having to sit there, look at all those images and annotate. So it was a way to like use that, let's say, data set that's been collected, and use like current AI to be able to like process at scale without a human having to sit there, and to see if that is like something that would allow you to extract useful information. And then from there, it evolved into kind of like generating some 3D space environment, um, that would have all these images on the web, and then you would have a way to navigate or understand these relationships in some way. And one of the approaches is obviously like you can use like clustering. So like something like UMap or TSNE or whatever. There's other approaches like self-organizing maps too. The one that I used was like a UMap. I thought it was UMap seems to work like really well in certain occasions, to like be able to pull things apart. TSNE sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But then how do you build this 3D map of relationships between the images that is kind of like immersive? Um, and I thought about like, oh, it'd be really cool to kind of like dive in an immersive, world, and then be able to experience. this with your own kind of like body in a sense. And then from there, my longer term goal was to be able to then take those images and actually generate kind of like mini 3D worlds from those images using like 3D generative AI technology. So like instead of like just being like a single still image, you can actually like dive in and like look around. Uh, so that's kind of like the plan of that. It's still a work in progress. It takes a lot of research, but I'm curious to see if like I can get it to that point eventually.
Okay, that sounds super interesting project for sure. You know, one thing I when you were sharing, like it made me think like there are some reels or posts which has higher engagement than other. And what if there is an objective evaluation of content? Let's say you rank it.
Ye-
Sorry if I got
Yeah.
yeah. So what I was saying, like let's say you using a vision LLM, you rank 10 10 posts and you compare that ranking versus the engagement you got on that post. So it could reveal
Oh, yeah.
some info about what is the algorithm, what is the algorithm aligning to, what kind
Oh, maybe you cut out. Mayor,
of, oh man. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, man.
you cut
I,
out of it. Yeah,
let's
repeat because I didn't hear.
yeah. So what I was saying is, it would be interesting to know, like, for the content, ranking it with objectively with vision based model, let's say 10 posts, and
Mhm.
comparing those results with the 10 posts which got engagement. So it could reveal what's in what's Instagram's self, like,
Algorithm.
yeah, like something like, okay,
Yeah.
if it's like if
Uh,
it's two mid
it's
journey
like
images and yeah, yes, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, that's interesting. No, I was gonna say like that's interesting that you brought that because I did think about it at some point, like kind of reverse engineering like Instagram's like ranking. Um, because like you do get some posts that get a lot more. Sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me. You do get some posts that get a lot more engagement than others. And some that I get more likes. And like oftentimes I question whether it's like the timing that I upload a post, or is it just the way that Instagram pushes like certain content. So like they can take like one image and just push it, in some way, and somehow it just finds its way into like other people's uh Instagram accounts when they browse, and then it just, or like the explore page, and people like click on it, and then it like pushes it even more. Um so it's kind of that part was also interesting. I think like the social component of that is really interesting as well, because some posts that do get like, I would say like a higher amount of likes, or that go viral in some sense, they have very unique features, but at the same time, the highest value or the highest like ones, they share similar view perspectives, or like
Oh.
similar uh, what would you call it? Like compositions, right? Like image composition.
Hmm.
But it'll be like a so it's there's two things that I've noticed is like it's either like a really image composition. So sometimes it's like a single object, but it's like framed in like a really nice way. Other times is like the object, or like the thing that's in the image itself is like so unique that somehow it
Hmm.
just sort of resonates with like a wide range of people. And it's kind of like tapping into like human consciousness in some way, right? Because a lot of people kind of like see this object, even though it's like AI generated by somebody who typed the prompt, but it captures uh, or it stimulates some aspect of like their visual. I don't know, like stimulation. Like it's kind of interesting. Like
Emotion.
that's another topic. Like yeah, emotion. Like it captures some emotion that makes it hmm, resonate with humans in some way, even though it's like AI generated. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, and the other part about it was, which is kind of like a more of a uh, how to I'm trying to figure out like what's a good word to put that for that. But some of the images I think are they kind of make you dream a little bit. I think that's kind of like the best way that I
Mm.
can put it. Like make
Spark an
people that
idea.
see them. Yeah, it's like a wow, like dream, like oh cool. Like sometimes you get comments like, oh my god, like I wish I could be there. Where is this? Like, is this real? Like, how do I go there? And that aspect is like very human, but it does make you wonder, like, for example, if you can capture or reverse engineer that human thought process or human emotion process, and then you can pinpoint that into like some latent space, or like extract that feature from the human emotion, and map it to like a latent space, or to reveal like a set of images or a group of images that impact uh, this human emotion. Um, so I thought about that, and I thought that was like kind of fascinating, but uh, that kind of falls more like in like a neuroscience like type thing, and I'm not familiar with that.
Dude, that's the comment itself reveals a lot. Like maybe I should try this prompt. Like once the image is created, generate an emotion of wow or surprise, and then see how the image morph, and then maybe prompt of okay, create such an image that people want to live in it or feel it, and then see.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about humans is that they can imagine just beyond the image, or like they can like kind of
Mm,
take that journey, right? Of
yeah.
like maybe potentially placing themselves in that space, and that's what makes them kind of like makes it like more emotional or like more surreal. And that like I had like a way to like kind of select like the what's it called, like the way that I select images is that they're kind of like in between like the real and the surreal, and they're living kind of like in that between space where it's like almost balanced, but it makes you like dream or go there in some way. um and I think that's what artists, what movie directors, I think even architects or people that live in kind of like this visual space, they have this kind of highly fine-tuned way to curate visual sensory imagery. um so I thought from that perspective that was really interesting. And I don't know if you can extract that into like some sort of neural model that knows like, okay, this is what resonates emotionally with people. Now let's
Mm.
map it into like some model that you can use to create imagery. But then that gets into ethical things that it's
Yeah,
is
right.
that a good thing to have for humans, right?
But I do, there will be some party who's gonna exploit that.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if you've seen like there was this new show called Three Body Problem on Netflix, that they have this kind of like immersive headset, and like they put on this headset and they dive in, and it's like like a fully immersive environment, but it felt so real that it like they touched the emotions of everything. And I seen kind of like these experiments coming out where like they have like those moving floors where you can walk on it with a headset, and it feels like you are walking in that environment. Um so I think like humans are kind of exploring this direction of like, okay, can we make like these virtual spaces, or like these gadgets that can lead us to feel like we are in those immersive spaces as real as possible. Um, and how that would be helpful to humans, how would that be like damaging to humans? I don't know yet, but it's kind of like something that it is fascinating, right? Because maybe in 10 years we would have this ultra sensitive, like realistic gadgets that we just put on our headset and boom, like we're in the space. And everything seems real, but it's not.
Yeah. Meher has some kind. I wanted to end and then note uh like that text or image to spatial visualization workflow. Then connect with VR. So you get like full, then wear a haptic suit so you can like vibrate and feel the response from the surface. Maybe some variation of smell or like, the background noise sometimes you feel in a cafe and like it would be another level of immersive experience. Okay. Actually, Meherzad has a question. Talking about Instagram, is it possible to access content?
Using a specific hashtag now? What do you mean, like search by hashtag?
Yeah, I think you could directly search, if I'm not wrong, particular hashtag.
Yeah, you could do that. You could definitely do that. You can like follow hashtags, and it would just populate your feed with whatever's like being hashtag to that. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay. We're almost getting into 1 hour mark. I have a rapid fire round, but before that,
Yeah.
is there any? Uh, oh, you're talking about Instagram API for.
Oh, API. I haven't used the Instagram API, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, now maybe I'm getting his question. He wants to access particular hashtag through a API. So,
Instagram has become a little bit protective over their data because of
yeah.
like obviously everybody wants to train on that now. But like I remember like a few years back, you could literally, I don't know, maybe like 4 years back, you literally could just write like a scraping bot and like get stuff from Instagram like that. But I don't know. I haven't used the API myself, so I'm not sure. But if they have been, they become a little bit restricted. Probably need like a business account or something like that, and they probably charge you. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm no way promoting this, or sorry, but there are techniques of scraping which you could
Yeah,
test.
do it ethically.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So before we move to the rapid fire, is there any idea, research, technique, or things which we haven't covered into the interview and you would like to get it out?
uh, research technique. I don't. I mean, I really like the 3D generative space, because like I think like or 3D reconstruction and that sense. I think like if we able to solve that in some way, that'll opens up a lot of possibilities for like this kind of like sim to real gap, right? Like how to get simulations to real life and training and things like that, or even just like being able to have like digital twins of things. And recently I was reading a really interesting article about some lab in Barcelona that they're trying to do like a digital twin of like a human body, so they can actually um, test how drugs or like certain things would work on a human body. So run like a kind of real simulation on a digital twin. Um, and the implications of that are fascinating, right? So like you can test medicine, you can test all things without actually having a human, and maybe at some point you can get into a more um direct or more custom tailor medicine to like a specific human being, which opens up a lot of possibilities, right? So I think 3D generation from that respect and this kind of digital twin, I think is really fascinating, and we'll see where that goes. It's only getting better.
Interesting.
Oh, Mayor, actually, Mayor, I have another one.
Yeah, let's go.
I saw something that, yeah, I saw recently, there was like a company that came out of stealth mode that's called like the Menti bot. And what they're doing that is really kind of interesting is like they're developing like a little robot for like the house. but they're incorporating like kind of like all the latest models, like large language models, visual language models, NeRF to like do like SLAM of 3D space.
Mm.
Um, but what's interesting about this robot is that they made it in a way where like if you do take it home, you can teach it to do things by showing it. Um, so that's fascinating to me. Like that wasn't available before, but it's like becoming available now. And it's kind of like having like a little kind of pet robot that you can like teach it things visually or talk to it and have like a more deep interaction, like as if you were talking with an LLM. To me, that's probably like the most interesting thing that's happening right now.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, it's similar to how you teach a kid and show them, and like it's like one to few shots in LLM prompting, but like now you're visually teaching. Okay, these are I'm gonna teach you a few times. Now you pick up that task.
Yeah. So from that perspective, robotics becomes really interesting to see if it actually can scale and like build, a product that is actually usable in that sense. And if you can have something like that around the house that you can teach it to do things, and it combines all these technologies like that. That's kind of interesting. I don't know what the implications would be eventually, but yeah, definitely very interesting.
All right, I think let's see if the internet we issue in the fire. But okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
so first thing I want to compliment you. Like there are few uh, research announcements which I find through your Instagram story first, then I find on Twitter or LinkedIn. So you really get the source and get the like the pipeline of you sharing is very fast. It's kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you use that increase your productivity. AI.
Tools that increase my productivity. Um, I do use ChatGPT for right for certain things. Uh, it's good to get like depending like writing or things like that. Good to get a good rough draft out, and then you just modify it. Uh, Coding tweaks or like trying to like understand some code. It's also like really good for that. So I do use that a lot. Um, I love Visual Studio Code. I mean, I use it a lot. Uh, so like in combination with that, um, I don't know. I've been like using Blender a lot more than like Rhino because like I know I haven't used the new Rhino, but like Blender for visualization, it comes with like a lot of things. Like you can do a lot of things with Blender. Um, so it's really cool and it's free, so it's like open source. And there's like a lot of plugins and things that people are developing for it. Touch Designer is really interesting too. It's real time visualization, and you can do like point clouds or whatever sort of animations can be used. I know uh, Fidas, he's like using it to like visualize brain scans, like recordings on real time, which is kind of fascinating. Um, in Unreal Engine, it's like a monster in visualization. But yeah, I think those, from my perspective, are really cool.
God. And I remember you recommended me a podcast called How I Made My First Million. And
Oh
since then,
yeah,
I've been following that show and I love the content. And also, I watched like Shan, which is one of the hosts, has a great masterclass on storytelling, which is like, I think it's people might want to check that out.
yeah,
It's on point. So, what are some other podcasts you listen or found recently which are interesting?
yeah. I actually there's like a few like for AI related stuff that are. I'm just gonna like look it up on my phone real quick, but there's a few for AI that are deeper, like beyond kind of like the hype. They're just like digging into like the real. Which one of them is called? Let me
Latent
just see if I
space.
can. Oh, I listened to that one, but that one is like more like industry. Like
Yeah,
it's kind of like catch up with the latest industry stuff.
yeah.
But machine learning street talk. I don't know if you've
Okay.
heard of that one.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That guy goes deep.
And they have like these amazing guests like that are kind of like deep into like machine learning or they've been doing it for like a while, and these are like top notch researchers that have been involved, and like it could get a little bit technical, but they dive into what I like about it is that they dive into fundamental questions. And I think that's kind of going beyond the hype, right? It's like why people doing research and what is like really the problem that people are trying to solve in this space. So that one's really good from that perspective. And then there's another one. Let me see. Oh, the Twiml AI podcast with Sam Sharrington. That one's cool. That one gives you kind of like the latest industry, like cutting edge stuff. Uh, so that one's really cool. And then yeah, with the top there was one that I really like, but I don't know they haven't made as many episodes as before. It's called Generally Intelligent.
Oh,
Um, and it's from like some lab or some company, some lab that is developing like agents that can work like humans. But they have like a series of podcast talks that are just like great. Like they have like some really interesting people on it.
yeah. Like, is it like the founders of Imbue AI, or could be?
I, I forget what I forget. They always like mention it at the beginning of the pod. I forget what's the name of the lab, but it's I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually know what you're talking. I'm aware of it. It's good. Have
Yeah,
you heard the
but
MLOps podcast?
I have no, not really. I don't think
That's
I.
a good one too. Like, they also
Yeah,
have like free conferences on machine learning, and it's mostly focused on deploying machine learning applications. So it's a
yeah,
good one.
yeah. Yeah, that's cool. No, but I do like these ones that are like deeper into I just like fundamental questions because then
Mm.
that's kind of like what drives research and investment at the end, right? Like what are they really trying to solve and where all these kind of great ideas to come from. And uh I think yeah, I think those are my favorite ones.
Yeah, it encourages the first principle thinking for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Uh, People you follow on X, which you love to read their tweets.
Uh so off the top, Andrew Karpathy. Like,
Mm.
if you want to get like a real taste of what like state of the art thinking could be in AI, right? He's probably like the best, I would say. Like that's literally like the best state of the art thinking right there. Um, Dr. Jin Fan,
Mm.
he's doing like I would say like he's if he has like a lab now in NVIDIA called Gear, right? Generally something agents, right? Um, Generally embody AI agents or something like that. And his work or like the work that he's done over like the last few years exploring like agents is really fascinating, right? They did the Minecraft agent that like be like a wrecker or something. But it was like all AI. Um, so I think like he also posts like really interesting tweets about like that type of stuff and like commentary. I don't know what his handle is, but maybe you know it, Mayor. Um, uh, there was, and then I just follow people for like that post papers, like Ack, right?
Mm.
He posts like kind of like these recent papers every day. Um, and then there was another guy that I follow that's really interesting. I can't think. he did like 3D. So I can't think of it on my top of my name. But all right, I'll get back to you on that.
I see. Okay. Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Can you hear me now?
No, I
Okay,
just can't
okay. Yeah,
remember. Do you hear me?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I can't
Yeah, it's
remember of
difficult
the
to
other person that I follow. Yeah,
maybe later. We can add into show notes. I, I don't recall
yeah.
if you were the one who shared me the tweet of Levels IO or something. You know that
Which one?
indie soft Levels IO, Peter Levels, the indie
Oh,
software developer
the
guy.
oh yeah, that he has like these like little kind of like indie companies that are doing like AI.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's pretty interesting too. But he's like deploying it, right? Like he's like building the product and deploying it and getting it out there like as soon as he can. And he's not like an AI researcher. He's just building product. Yeah, he's cool. He's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Yeah, now I remember you shared me, and I love his account. It's quite
Yeah,
uh, the different approach. He's very transparent. He's even transparent how much money each startup is making. He's transparent on which stocks he has invested, his portfolio, how much is making return on his investments. It's great to see that. Uh,
yeah, he's
all right.
cool.
Okay, I got brain freeze now. uh, any papers which are in your to read list?
Papers. Um, so there's one that came out recently called Realm Dreamer. I did kind of read through it, but I have to like go back to it. Realm Dreamer, and it follows kind of the trajectory of like Text to Room, Prolific Dreamer, and these kind of like 3D scene generation papers. Um, there was one I can think. There's a few that are coming out right now. The one Voyager by
Mm.
Jim Fan and his group. That one's a really interesting paper. Because I think you can just probably look up Voyager, and then it's like about this agent that they created using like large language models of GPT-4 to solve essentially like an open-ended game like Minecraft. So that paper is really interesting too. Um, there was some paper I can't think of the name, but it was like diplomatic or diplomacy. It was from Meta Lab, but it was like teaching an agent how to like do diplomacy essentially or like learn
Mhm.
diplomacy, and they tested it out with like negotiation tactics, and that was really interesting because it's kind of like how do you get an agent to be able to persuade uh, without revealing his cards? Essentially, it's kind of like the poker kind of strategy. Um, and then they kind of built this agent out of that, which I thought that was fascinating. So that one's definitely interesting too. Um, and then recently is just these papers that are, I don't have like one in particular in mind, but they're coming out more, which is, um, what happens if you have like a set of agents and then like, can they cooperate with each other? And they're kind of like bringing out questions of like game theory with like AI agents, right? So like those papers that are kind of popping out now with agents and game theory are really interesting too.
Yeah. Do, did actually maybe next time I would like to brainstorm and go deeper into how this like multi-agent world in architecture and design workflows like look like, and also building like now like I was seeing the trend from prompt engineering to like process, like people are making like dev in projects like software development cycle cloning where each agent has one particular task. So
Yeah.
instead of we uh, with the diffusion models or the like completely designed flow plan or space, how is that like multi-agent collaborative world in our workflow, how we break the task and stuff like that. And
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. I think like what's interesting about these agent things is that um like how do you, what do you have them do, like what is the specific task that you have them do, and it kind of goes back to, like, do you build a team? And I'm waiting
Mm,
for like something to drop from, like, remember back in, like, I don't know, it was like 2015, 2017, or that era of
mm,
like large scale reinforcement learning from like OpenAI and DeepMind, where they were testing it out on like Go or like
mm,
Dota or like StarCraft, and they had like these agents kind of like beating out humans. Um, so I don't know if they're gonna do something like that again, or like they'll have like, a team of agents playing humans in some kind of like really open-ended hard game. Um, but that's really interesting because like now they're like having these, they're setting up these benchmarks of like, okay, you have like an agent, can he complete this task from your computer? So like if you tell it like, go do this in this software or navigate the web and find this information and do this and that with that information, um, you know how do you do that with an agent or like a group of agents, and like how do you set a benchmark to test how good they are, kind of like with like the elo for large language models.
mm,
So we're starting to get into that point of like testing agents out, so that's really interesting because that, um where you let these things take actions, that's where you might have, a little bit more of a non-static approach of conversation just with a chatbot, right?
mm. That's interesting. Yeah, like multimodal foundational model, which has multiple agents, and some agents have the capacity of simulation, imitate based reinforcement learning. So you get best of all the worlds.
Yeah, and I think that's essentially what Jim Fan is like working at his
Mm,
lab, which is like, how do you get a generally foundational model of an embodied agent, um, and that would combine like everything, right? Like that's
Uh,
everything in there. Yeah, and so that's cool. That's really interesting stuff. And I think Jan LeCun has his own idea of like generally intelligent agents, right?
mm,
But it seems like once these foundational models start coming in together, and like OpenAI has like the Sora model, which they claim that that's probably one of the keys to get into like this ultimate generative model, because if you can run a video to simulate environments or conditions, um, and if it's like accurate, right? Like to some extent, like if it can simulate physics from like a AI model, like that's amazing, right? Like you can test out like a whole bunch of things or run a bunch of experiments from that perspective, um, and see what information you get back. So that yeah, that's definitely really interesting. I don't. I'm curious to see what the next 5 years are going to be like with that.
I see. They tell you that I met Jim Fan in Valley when I was.
Yeah, yeah, I think you mentioned that. Yeah,
He's very humble and like I think like it's Voyager paper also like sparked a lot of different ideas of like how angels interact in the memory, and like I think that simulation based research with robotics have so much we and reinforcement learning so much we could integrate in architecture research. All right, uh, I think it was lovely chatting with you as always. Had so much ideas and tinkering, and you're doing amazing. Well, actually, I have one last question. How the heck
yeah.
you manage your time? You have full-time job. You're managing diffusion architecture. You teach workshop. You share amazing research and building also projects and tools.
Mayor, I struggle because like sometimes I burn out. Like I'm just like, oh, I need a rest. But I don't know. I collaborate with people a lot, right? I like collaborating with people. So like if people are for some of these things, like usually it's like a collaboration. I can't do it on my own. It's like really impossible
Mm.
sometimes. And like Geo helps me a lot. So yeah, that helps a lot.
This is your foundation.
Yeah, she's my partner. She's my partner in crime with all this stuff sometimes. Ooh. You froze there a bit.
Yeah, I just like heard Geo is a partner in crime, and then gra-
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's more corporation. Like is that right? And Geo, are those the three secrets?
No, I think it's like it just comes down to like priority. Like when I try to do things that are really interesting to me, or
Mm,
things that like I am deeply curious about, that I know um that I'm not, how do you say, like the energy that I get from doing those things, it's fulfilling, like it's satisfying.
mm,
So it doesn't drain me, right? And I think collaborations is part of that. Like I like collaborating with people because you get different ideas just from talking to people, and that is energizing. Um, and sometimes you know like me and you, like we sometimes we get energized just like talking about like some concepts, and we just start like speculating. We're like, yo, what if we can do this? And things like that, and then you start chasing those threads, and then that leads to something else, that leads to something else, and things come up. But and time management, so like time management comes after kind of prioritizing like what I'm really like deep into, and I go from there. Yeah.
yeah. Hope you are not frustrated with Revit details change in your work, but
Yeah, I mean that's like the architecture life. Like people, like sometimes I speak to people like, or architects that are older, and they're like, oh, like when is AI gonna solve this? Like when is AI gonna solve construction documents? And I'm like, that's too hard. Like I don't think we're there at any point in time. It's too hard. Like art, like sometimes I think about it. Like, can you actually get an AI agent to do architecture? And sometimes I'm just like, I don't know. Maybe like to some extent, like for example, like Finch, right? 3D, like
Mm,
this plugin, like
yeah,
they can solve some parts out of like architecture that you probably don't need AI. It's probably just like
mm,
a configurator model or
correct.
whatever. Um, and then like the other side of architecture, which is kind of like where you actually have to problem solve. Like the engineer might come back with a geotech report that says like, actually we can't have this type of foundation here. And can you get an AI to respond to that in some way? Maybe, yeah, but you're, as an architect, you are responsible to do this thing so the building doesn't fall down. So you can't really rely on the AI. You actually have to like um, go through it. It's kind of like the automatic, what is it called? Like automatic, like Tesla driving. Like maybe you can get like 90% or 80% of the way there, but that extra 10%,
Mm.
that's like the hardest percent. Like you have to work like 10 times as hard to get that 10%, right? And yeah, AI for architecture. So when people say like, "Oh, is AI going to replace architects?" No, there's no way. Like this architecture as a discipline, and like the way that you have to relate and to communicate with a whole bunch of other disciplines, and like gather all that information into like something that is buildable, and that it would stand, and that it meets all these code requirements and all these safety requirements. Yeah, we're not there yet. Like that's too hard. We're problem.
I think you mentioned a very important. Like I'll give a example. So I built a product, and I can for like right now with AI ChatGPT to make a prototype, you could do like a weekend or a week. But to make it like production worthy and useful, 7 to 8 weeks. Edge cases, handling the failure case, like constantly getting feedback. Like one interesting thought is right now humans are the RLHF annotators. Like when the uh
Yeah.
AI gives output, good or bad design, thumbs up, thumbs down, like. And that, like, to your point, like, it takes time to make useful, like from level 1 to level 7, it- it's a lot of work. I
Yeah,
think.
it's really hard. Mary, like you probably thought about this too, but like um you can probably do like we're gonna get to a point where we could generate like text to buildings at some point,
Mm,
right? Um, where maybe like from a data set that somebody has, and like somebody can probably get a data set of like Revit buildings or so on and so forth. Um, but then, like, if you do that, like, it's just gonna be a repetition of any old building. So you're not gonna get like a Saha out of that, or like, one of these kind of unique style buildings. So probably to get like generic buildings, yes, like that. Like, that's what I was saying. Like Finch probably has
mm,
that solved without using AI at this point.
mm,
But the other part that comes with it, which is like put in the meat and bones and like all the details and like this thing has to stand up and like all that stuff, like that's really hard, man. Like and I worked in architecture for like 8 years now, and I always thought about this question. I'm like, is it possible to automate my job? I don't know. I
I
don't
would
know.
say, like, part of it would be like, I think one of the hard problem I'm solving right now is encoding uh flow plan data in image or PDF into structured data. That is a big bottleneck for a lot of downstream automations. Once you have structured data, like, you could use text based or multimodal based LLMs to do a lot of spatial intelligence or spatial recommendation out. Like, but it's very difficult to encode that in first place. So hopefully next time we chat,
Yeah.
I'll give you status how production worthy it is. So,
There is a company that I spoke to a few months back called MBue, like MBUE. Um,
oh.
and what they're trying to do, or like their kind of vision, it is to capture architecture intelligence in drawings, right? So how are you able to get like look at a architecture drawing, like a PDF or whatever of like a set of construction documents, um, and then be able to like just capture if things are wrong, kind of like do like the QA/QC that somebody in an office would do, right? For like a set of drawings, and can you actually capture that type of intelligence, put it into a model, so then you can feed like your drawings to this machine. It'll tell you like kind of all the errors and things like that, or things that you missed. And then
Mm,
back check that with like maybe code compliance and things like that. But they're not there yet. They're like still early phase. But like I tested their product and it's sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But then you can just imagine like how hard it is when like a whole bunch of offices around the world, they all have a different set of conventions of how they do drawings, right? Maybe some are similar, but symbols, text, and all things like that. And then the relationship that exists between like a note that you put in a drawing, and then on another
mm,
sheet where you have like maybe a section or a large detail. How do you connect that relationship so like an AI model understands that? Like that's a really complicated problem.
damn, dude, it's like having that spatial relationship node graph within a drawing sometimes is challenging, and then you have multiple drawings at section. That's another level of problem. Yeah.
And like a building is like that. A building is like a set of like hierarchical relationships, right?
Mm,
Um, and it's like it's like a different scales too, like different resolutions of relationships. And then on top of that, like those digital, or let's say like those relationships that can be traced back to like a 3D model or like a set of drawings and things like that. There's like another relationship that is kind of more abstract, which is like uh social uh things that happen in a space. That's kind of
mm,
what architects can do because we are human, so we can intuit some of those things. But that relationship of what happens in a space, like why would I put a cafeteria or like an open space or like an atrium like here? just so it could connect the views from like this floor to the other floor, or to generate like interactions between people in this space in like a different way, right? That stuff, that sort of relationship, or that abstract layer of thought, the social thought that architects do. I don't know how to encode that in like in AI. Like I've been thinking about that, and I'm not sure how to do that. Like that's really, maybe with Sora, like where you can simulate those types of things, maybe. But it's that's like the architecture intelligence that I don't think we would know how to capture yet.
Mm. Me, like I think it requires a different architecture, like like workflow architecture, how you mix model,
Mm,
because now we want, maybe like right now it's, if you input different set of image, let's say floor plan versus section, it's treating like as an image. But I'm, if there is a schema of like, okay, every floor has an associated schema, and then it's a defined graph relationship, maybe that could add a good starting point. But what I love, there was one tweet I saw. The AI you're using right now is the worst version of it. It's only
yeah,
gonna get improved. So,
yeah, yeah. But I think like this, like from like if I'm thinking from like architectural perspective, like these type of things that are, they're kind of like, I would say like human intelligence, right? Because as a human, we can say, okay, like it would be really cool to be in this space and to look up and to see, something there. Um, Whereas like if you are generating like a 3D model or something that has some floor plan intelligence, which could be a graph
mm,
or whatever, um, that type of intelligence is very simple. Or like the graph approach, it's kind of like very boiled down to like something
mm,
very abstract that just gives you like a starting guide or whatever. um so I'm wondering like how do you take it to the next level where you're like thinking like that, more architecturally or like more human like based. And that's interesting. I mean, that's an open question, but the representation of that, like, is it like a large language model? Is it like a visual thing? Or is it something else, right? Like that's, I don't know if we have that answer yet.
mm. One interesting thing, like, so these models have collective intelligence. So
Yeah.
let's say, what's the right balance of human constraint putting into that models? That's an, like, for example, if you want a sofa to place in a living room, you could just say a
Hmm.
sofa in a room and let the model use its best intelligence to place it. But also, it has high failure rate where it will sometimes randomly place where it doesn't make sense. So you
Yeah.
could add a human constraint in the prompt. Oh, place a sofa near the right side of the window, and then so you still have some creativity. Okay, how offset and, or like some, but also it limits to a sofa like position which the model could have been a creative. So I don't know, like what's the right level of human constraints along with this collective intelligence model.
That's a good point. And I think so. I'm gonna put it like maybe into an example, right? Like you've been traveling, so you've been living in like different spaces, right?
Mm,
And there's things in each of those spaces um that you can probably feel like, oh, like this is a really cool space. Like there's something about that space, right? And it could be like, I don't know, it could be a view to somewhere. It could be like the type of windows, or it could just be the layout, or it could be, the ceiling heights and things like that. And these are decisions that were taken during like design process by like an architect or designer or whatever. Um, and then there's like spaces that you're just like, oh, like I don't like this space, like this space
mm,
feels weird, like I don't want to sit, like if you want to work somewhere, like you probably go somewhere and you're just like, I don't know if I want to sit here and work, it doesn't feel like I want to sit here.
mm,
Like maybe it's for something else, maybe it's just like you go in and out pretty much. And there's spaces that you do want to sit there. and then there's like things within that space, like architectural elements that shape that experience, and those are decisions that have to be made. So if you want to like kind of automate that design process, how do you like like I think that's like my question, right? Like, how do you get that level of intelligence to be able to make those decisions that can give you that perception of being, of wanting to be in that space as a human? And maybe this ties back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with like the images on diffusion, where like there's some images that people look at them and they just resonate with them, like they want to be in there. So maybe it's like, you know, stitching a whole bunch of miles together again, but how do you extract, you know, that specific sensibility, or that you can encode that sensibility in some way, so it's useful, so you can like automate it. I don't know. That's really like the big question right there, I guess. Oh, Mayor, Mayor, did you hear me? Mayor? Oh, okay, you're back. Yeah.
Damn, that was an interesting point. Like how you encode the sensibility and then you got cut off.
Yeah, and and like
Mm.
just to like finish that thought, but I think that would be like the most useful part of like if you were to do an AI that generates spaces. Otherwise, it's just gonna be like something that just generates a 3D, and yeah, it's cool, but it's like boom, like there's no extra sensibility. Like you're not gonna, there's like no metric to say like, oh, this space is like really interesting, right? And I think the metric part of it, which when we deal with AI, because everything has to run through some sort of metric to be able to measure or rank, you know, how we define those metrics, it's like also like another part of the problem. And that's, I would say, like
Mm.
that's the hardest part. Like, how do you develop a metric that encompasses that? Like, blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, like two things I want. Like I always compare like okay, design is very subjective. Like let's look at fashion. If I say AI Midjourney, give me the most beautiful fashion trending cloth. It will do. It will use all the collective intelligence. But you may not like it. Maybe it's not your style.
Yeah,
Most of the people will like it. But there are always outlier cases. Let's say most of the people like minimalistic design, but there are always people who are like, ah, that's too empty. I want more character in this place or whatever. So it's it's difficult to agree 100% good design. And then okay, maybe you could solve that problem with more hyper personalization. Let's give more context or give past history of that user. Okay, this is an outlier user. He has preference. That's why Pinterest, Instagram, they know what you're watching, then recommend similar.
yeah,
They have some hyper. So if you give me your wardrobe data or your past buying behavior, then if I can generate what would Daniel like a fashion design, that would be way more better than a generic, okay, give me a t-shirt. So there is some unlock
Mayor.
there.
Yeah, I got a response to that because this is actually like something that I'm been more fascinated about. Um, I was so this guy that I was telling you about, Kenneth Stanley, he used to be an open AI, and then he was doing open-ended research agents and things like that. But he started his own like social network called Maven, and
Mm,
his idea was that instead of like using likes or followers, um, as a metric of engagement and kind of like importance into preferences, he was gonna just like let the network be based on preferences, and you can just follow like your interests, right?
mm,
So there's no followers, you're just following interests, so you will be populated into like certain groups of interests. And it's like a different type of approach as a social network. And one of the things that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting was that the decision of social media companies to put the like button on
Mm.
something. That's their metric. That's how they kind of created a proxy for interestedness for humans, right? And then based on that, they can build like some sort of ranking mechanism that can push things that you like into it. But what happens at the same time, and I think I started to experience this a bit with like diffusion, is that the images that receive the most likes or like the ones that go most viral, it kind of like also trains me to like keep looking out for those so I can repost them to get engagement.
Mm.
So it's like it's kind of like a feedback loop of training. Like the algorithm is training me to do this because it knows it'll get the most engagement. And then at the same time, it's just like, okay, but I guess like that's the metric that I'm trying to optimize, right? Because I'm on social media, so I have to do that to be able to keep optimizing the metric. Um, so I think that problem is like really interesting because it's kind of like a paradox in itself, but it's like the algorithm is training you to train the algorithm.
Yeah, like that makes me think like what's the incentive then? Is the incentive okay, make content which most people find engaging or make content which people find inspiring and solves a problem like which couldn't be engaging sometimes you compromise on engagement but like could be valuable. It's tricky.
Yeah, and then you have like clients that like when they ask you to design architecture or like something like that. Like I recently, like I had experience where they would come up and they'll say like, "I want to design a space that's Instagrammable," and I'm just like, "That's an interesting metric, right?" Like that's what these people are basing their success of a project on is that it goes viral on social media because essentially that it stimulates economy and things like that.
Mm,
Uh, so we place like so much emphasis on that, and like the social media machine has become kind of like tied to capitalistic means of production essentially, that people think that if they do this, that if it's instagrammable they're going to get more money that way.
mm.
Um, and maybe that's like an overall more like kind of like social experiment that we're currently living at the moment. um, but it is interesting that it has seeped or like flowed down into like people wanting to design things that are Instagrammable. And I don't know, I don't know. I'm just speculating at this point, but it is an interesting thought because we're being trained by social media algorithms to think in this way in some manner.
I got an interesting thought when you're mentioning, like, you know, the debate, are we living in a simulation? Like, let's say when Instagram started, we were creating the culture, we are creating the trend. And now, Instagram, based on the trend, we started more watching and we behave that this is the trend. Like, instead of we creating, it's making us to like more kind of this or making us to behave, change our behavior or perception towards things.
Yeah, and like the
It's,
one of the most curious trends that I've noticed is like these TikTok dances. And
mm,
and to me that's like it's kind of interesting how some artists essentially, or like music artists, would make songs so they can have a dance to it that it could go viral on TikTok, because that way would get a wide they would catch a wider audience that way, for free essentially. There's no marketing. Or the marketing is the people doing the TikTok dance, and but it's like free marketing because if it goes viral, that's free marketing, and you don't have to spend any money on
mm,
that. But people do these dances, like these dance challenges, and that's like a social thing that's happening that I find fascinating. But at the same time, is like, is that being pushed by the algorithm, or like are people generally like doing this because they want to do it? But it seems like it's more just because the algorithm knows that it would push that, so people know that the algorithm would push that, so they're gonna do it to get more views or whatever. um I don't know. We're like in an interesting like dilemma, and I don't know what's gonna happen when AI becomes like kind of more full scale. In that sense, where generative content becomes kind of like more mainstream and things like that. But um, at some point, it's just like too much information, right? Like people just, I don't know. Maybe some people get tired of it, but it is. it is interesting how these social trends are forming digitally and then they go out into the physical world.
Yeah. Isn't it like, can you, uh, I think I got you back. Isn't like algorithm, TikTok or Instagram, simulated a whole, can you hear me?
Yeah, here, yeah.
And like we debate about this simulation and other behavior, but it's interesting that a TikTok algorithm or Instagram reel simulated a whole massive behavior to start them dancing. Like people were living generations. Now they're dancing quite frequently for a
Yeah.
video to get viral. And what like that is crazy. You could simulate a particular agenda or particular trend with this algorithm, and people will start doing it. And that's how you control a good amount of the world. That's so crazy.
Yeah, and it's it is like a way of social engineering in some way, so like guide things. And I think that's kind of like both the power and like the pro and con of like social media, right? It's like yes, you can get virality. Anybody can get virality. You don't have to be super famous. So you have access to this sort of so big large social graph that connects you to I don't know things like Facebook or Meta's like social graph is like I don't know how many billion of people, right? So like
Mm,
imagine that, like you're connected to the world in this social graph. So imagine like if Meta like visualizes this social graph and they
mm,
spot this kind of like trends or viral moments that occur, it'd be cool to see like how that relates, to like humans in some way. Or how it lets us see humans as social beings digitally in some way. Um, I don't know. This is just like now we're going into like some other space, but it is interesting because it does shape how we see the world. Social media has definitely like allow us to connect to a wider range of people that before social media we didn't have. Like I remember like when I was growing up, like when MySpace was just starting, and that was like a novelty. Um, and you started connecting with like random people from like your neighborhood and stuff like that that you didn't know, right? And then Facebook just took it to a whole nother level, and now we're like TikTok age, where like young kids have like 7 seconds or whatever, 15 seconds to make some dancing video that goes viral around the world.
mm.
Um, and and that's why I mean that's the digital aspect of our lives it's like influencing how we think and then back and forth. So like these companies I'm assuming that they probably have a pretty good understanding of like human nature, right?
Yep. Like more than a country's data, they have the data. All right. Before Geo calls
Yeah.
you out, and I don't want to make her wait for breakfast. I really appreciate the
Yeah.
discussion. Thanks a lot for being on the show. Looking forward
Yeah,
to what
man.
you're building, your next projects. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, man, for having me. And as always, man, we can go on. Like we can just keep talking.